Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to wish you all warmly welcome to this virtual occasion celebrating the 25th anniversary of Austrian, Finnish and Swedish EU membership. On a personal subjective note, I was in my 20s when Finland became a member of the European Union. I still recall my very concrete feeling at the time of being able to breathe more freely as an EU member. I know this is not a feeling shared today by all citizens in the EU, not even in our countries represented here today. But it's good to remind and reinforce to oneself of where it all started and what you hoped to achieve. Hanaholmen is an institution where normally two countries meet, Sweden and Finland. We are brought together here to create added value for cooperation in the fields of culture, society and economy. Today, we are delighted to include Austria as a partner in our program. We had a genuine challenge planning this seminar. We tried to determine the topic, which included a multitude of candidates, amongst others, the future of multilateral cooperation, or reflections on EU negotiations and membership from key EU profiles, or the successes and challenges of free mobility, or effects on border regions from EU membership. It was clear that we wanted to have a strong focus on the future of EU. So in the end, it was easy to finally agree on the focus on the European Green Deal. It's often said that EU integration moves forward through the management of acute crises. That may be the case, but one cannot neglect the importance of comprehensive strategic visions defined at the EU level. In the early membership phase, the Lisbon Strategy set as a aim to make the EU the most competitive and dynamic knowledge-based economy in the world by 2010. It was succeeded by the European 2020 strategy, an agenda for growth and jobs for the next decade, emphasizing smart, sustainable and inclusive growth. In December 2019, the European Commission presented the European Green Deal for making the EU's economy sustainable by turning climate and environmental challenges into opportunities. The program today is a result of fruitful cooperation between the Austrian Embassy, the Swedish Embassy, the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Finnish Institute for International Affairs, and Hanaholmen, the Swedish-Finnish Cultural Center. We want to warmly thank our partners and all speakers. I also want to express my appreciation for Marika Krug and Maija Veits for adding a cultural dimension by performing later today songs by Jean Sibelius, Ralph Gottoni, Ture Rangström, and Robert Stoltz. Due to the pandemic, we are unable to have an audience present here at Hanaholmen. However, we are delighted to have you to being able to join us online today. I will now give the floor to our moderator, Program Director Juha Jokela from the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gunvor Korkonman, and thank you also for the organizers to invite me to moderate this session. It's a great pleasure and honor to do that. I think this event reflects a series of events that have taken place today under these exceptional circumstances, and I'm very delighted that we managed here in the end as well bring together such an excellent program with such a high-level speakers and enthusiasm in it. I think this is also a reflection of how we often celebrate in these respective countries' anniversaries. We do it also by working, and that's why I'm very delighted that we have the future and the green agenda here with us today. But without any further ado, I would now like to introduce our keynote welcoming remarks presented by respective ministers from all of these three countries. The first one is from Caroline Edstadler, the Federal Minister for EU and Constitution from Austria. Then we have a video greeting from Tytti Tuppurainen, a Minister for European Affairs and Ownership Steering in Finland, and then from Hans Dahlgren, Minister for EU Affairs of Sweden. And after that, we will get back to the musical performances. Thank you very much. The greetings, please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm more than happy to participate in this event to the common EU membership of Finland and Austria today. Even if only virtually in these difficult times of crisis, I think it is very important to highlight our common 25th anniversary in the European Union. Looking back 25 years, not only Austria changed, but also the European Union and the whole world. Within the EU, we are now more politically and economically intertwined. In 1989, the Austrian government applied with the so-called letter to Brussels for the membership in the European Economic Community at that time. It was a historical moment when on June the 12th, 1994, 66.6% of Austrian citizens voted in favor of the EU membership. I remember the time when Austria joined the European Union. Back then, I lived in my hometown in Salzburg in the border region to Germany. Austria held the EU Council presidency in the meantime 3 times, most recently from July to December 2018, with the motto, "A Europe that protects." The main focus laid on security and the fight against illegal migration, security, prosperity and competitiveness through digitalization and stability in the European neighborhood. It is not only our anniversary that links Austria and Finland. At the EU level, we share common positions and common issues in many fields, such as rule of law and the EU budget. There are still many topics that need to be discussed within the EU to develop it further. One example are the Western Balkans. The EU is not complete until the Western Balkans joined the EU. This year, which marks our 25th anniversary, has also been overlined by the COVID-19 crisis. This pandemic has shown the strengths and weaknesses and the need for more resilience within the European Union. We need to draw lessons from these crises to look forward and to overcome further crises. It is crucial to respond in time to new developments in an ever more complex world. This is why I actively advocate for the start of the Conference on the Future of Europe. The crisis has also shown us that people expect more from the European Union. I'm convinced we can draw lessons from this crisis and make use of them for the better, for the future of the European Union. Thank you so much.
Greetings to you all. It is an honor to greet you via this video message. For a quarter of a century, EU membership has brought Finland, Sweden and Austria well-being, peace and stability. The world looked very different in 1995 when we joined the EU. So did the European Union. The world around us has become increasingly complex and unpredictable. At the same time, the EU has grown larger and more ambitious. However, leitmotif of the EU remains the same. Together, we are stronger. Together, we can make a difference. For small, export-driven countries, going alone is not an option. At the same time, the EU is much more than a common market. It is a community of values, and especially for Finland, EU is a security community. This year has been exceptional. It has been the year of the pandemic. While our focus is still on the crisis response and recovery, we also need to look ahead and work towards a more resilient and competitive EU. Here, Finland, Sweden and Austria have much in common. EU's common values are the bedrock of resilience. I am delighted on our close cooperation with Sweden and Austria in making sure that the rule of law and other key values are respected even in times of turbulence. We also share high ambitions in the field of climate policy. Green and digital transition is needed, not only to mitigate climate change, but also to boost the EU's competitiveness. The Green Deal is key to European resilience, growth and prosperity. The EU has not become paralyzed by the devastating effects of the pandemic. On the contrary, we have come together to agree on a historic, exceptional recovery package that will help us to enhance our competitiveness and move towards more sustainable economies. Building a stronger, deeper and fairer single market is close to the Finnish, Swedish and Austrian hearts. For us, ensuring an open economy and promoting a level playing field, both internally and globally, is key. At a time when protectionism is rising its head, the EU's role as a defender of free trade is ever more important. Strategic autonomy should not be about building walls and barriers. Instead, it should be about improving our competitiveness and investing in innovation to ensure that the EU remains an attractive trading partner that cannot be ignored. In an increasingly volatile world, the EU must continue to show leadership in building coalitions and partnerships in support of effective multilateralism. Here, we should act strongly according to our values. We are all shocked and saddened by the recent terrorist attack in Vienna. Such acts are totally unacceptable and also constitute attacks on our common values. It is evident that we need to continue our work on counter-terrorism with even greater determination to protect our citizens. As part of a comprehensive approach to security, I would also like to highlight the importance of combating hybrid threats. Finland, Sweden and Austria share the objective of a strong, united and well-functioning EU with a capacity to respond to European global challenges. In the past 25 years, EU membership has become an everyday reality, sometimes even something to take for granted for our citizens. Still, the work is not over. I look forward to continuing our cooperation towards decisions and actions that benefit our citizens and the whole EU. The EU exists for its citizens, and efficient EU action is the best way to increase trust in the EU. We also need more transparency and open and active communication to make the meaning and role of the EU more visible to citizens. I am convinced that together we can meet citizens' expectations and make the EU the most competitive and socially inclusive climate-neutral economy. I wish you all a successful seminar. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you for this opportunity to participate in this interesting seminar and the discussion. Although, of course, I must admit that I would rather have preferred to come again to Hanaholmen in person. But, you know, we have to accept the way that things are now. This year, 2020, marks the 25th anniversary for both the Finnish and the Swedish membership in the European Union. And even if the past year's work within our union has focused on combating the coronavirus, the other 24 years have been much more than emergency preparedness and recovery plans. I believe that it is important to recall, when we consider these 25 years, that public opinion in Sweden initially was not very positive towards the Swedish membership when we joined them back in 1995. Our referendum that we had on the matter was won with just a rather slim majority. But last year, I can say, we witnessed the highest approval opinion ever recorded in Sweden, 62%. And I'm really glad that more and more Swedes are experiencing and acknowledging the important work that is carried out within the European Union. And you know, we need some positive hope for the future in these difficult times. The fundamental idea behind the EU was, and will always be, I think, this: to keep the peace in Europe. And to succeed there, we have worked at binding so many links between our nations that it is today inconceivable that anyone would start a war against another member state. You know, since then, since our membership started during these 25 years, European integration and cooperation has certainly evolved. At that time, We went from 12 to 15 members. Then we expanded to 25, 27, even 28. And now, after Brexit, we are back at 27. And with more members, there is an even greater need to form alliances and to work with like-minded nations. And that is crucial to form the kind of compromises that will bring European cooperation even further. And I must say, this was very clearly on display during the negotiations on the EU budget for the next 7 years. There was a small group of member states, we call us the Frugal Four sometimes, supported strongly by Finland. We were able to have a substantial influence on the budget framework, not only on expenditure levels, not only on the content of the budget and the recovery fund and the clear focus that we have there on the climate, but also an important mechanism for rule of law conditionality. And I think it was a historic event when the European Council in July committed itself to the introduction of a regime of conditionality. And we certainly hope that the final steps can soon be taken to make sure that this political commitment is also transformed into a legal commitment. Maintaining the respect for the rule of law throughout our union is not an acute aspect that we only need to deal with today, but rather a process that we need to uphold for a credible and fair future European Union. And we will continue to work very closely with Austria, with Finland, with Denmark, with the Netherlands to ensure this. And we will also want to see how we can broaden our cooperation to other areas of common concern. One such area where I hope that we can work closer together in the future, that's the climate, the implementation of the Green Deal. And you know, we have our long-term objective of a climate-neutral EU by 2050. But if we are to realize that, we must also increase our reduction target in the shorter term. I think we need to adopt a binding EU climate target for 2030 that is at least 55% less greenhouse gas emissions, even more if we can. Our two countries are leading the way in championing an increased climate target for 2030. And we must continue, I hope, to side with other progressive forces in the Commission, the European Parliament, to reshape our societies for a transition to this climate neutral economy that we are going to have by 2050. So let us continue, Sweden and Finland, to work closely together so that we can come out of this ongoing crisis stronger and greener and more digital than ever before. Thank you so much for listening.
And after these excellent video greetings from the ministers, we will now move in the program towards our musical performances. And I am very honored and delighted to introduce you to Ms. Marika Krug, a well-known classical singer and musical star who has graduated from the Sibelius Academy in 2005. She is known for her international performances as an opera and a concert singer, leading musical roles at the Swedish Theatre in Helsinki as well as Helsinki City Theatre. And she also represented Finland in the Eurovision Song Contest in the late 1990s in Birmingham. She is accompanied by Maija Weiss, a pianist with an extensive international concert activities in the field of chamber music and lead accompaniment. She graduated from the University of Music in Vienna, and her cooperation with Viennese music world is an important feature of her international activities. They will perform songs by Jean Sibelius, Ralph Gottoni, Tore Rangström, and Robert Stoltz. And the first ones will be Jean Sibelius, Demanten på Marschnön, Ralph Gottoni's arrangement of the Finnish folk song Minun kultani kaunis on. Please, the floor is now yours. Thank you very much for these excellent performances. And now I'm delighted to guide us to our agenda today, and that is perspectives on the Green Deal from Austria, Finland, and Sweden. We have three excellent keynote interventions, presentations to this theme and topic. The first one comes from Austria. It's from Mr. Georg Rebernig, who is a managing director from the Austrian Environmental Agency. And this is, he has done an extensive career in the agency, and we are very much looking forward to your keynote presentation. The floor is now yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone, and it's indeed a big pleasure and honor that I can participate in this event. If you allow, I would like to start with some a personal approach. At the time when Sweden, Finland, and Austria acceded to the European Union, 1st of January 1995, I was environment attaché at the Austrian Perm Rep in Brussels. I entered there in 1994 in the preparatory phase when it was already clear that we would accede. And I remember one very good example of cooperation between countries, between our countries, which was that obviously the Swedish colleagues, the Finnish colleagues, and the Norwegian colleagues, not to forget, they had the referendum later in 1994. The three of us prepared for doing our work in Brussels. And it was the Danish colleague, the Danish environment attaché from an existing member state at the time, who introduced us to the council work, to the working group logic, to the preparation of co-repair, what kind of documents would come out, how to prepare the ministerial meetings. So I was part of the Scandinavian cooperation at the time, and I appreciate it very, very much. A lot has changed since then. We are not 12 or 15 as in 1995. We are now 28, 27. And it is a big pity that UK is leaving, not only from a political perspective, which I do not want to go into detail, but also from a very practical and say administrative and colleague-wise, because those the colleagues from the UK always were very, very knowledgeable, engaged, and I think we also lose knowledge when UK is leaving. The EU finds itself in the meantime amidst quite a number of crises. The COVID-19 pandemic being only the most recent and worst, at least how we perceive it. And the Green Deal is addressing both or tries to address all of these crises. So it tries to make to change these or to turn these crises into opportunities. And I want to mention, as was already said, the ecological crisis of absolute urgency, obviously the climate issue, but also the loss of biodiversity, the loss of our scarce natural resources. There's another, well, at least big challenge, which is the Industrial Revolution, everything connected to digitalization. There are geopolitical shifts, the relation between Europe and the other big global players. And what Europe is striving for, and what the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made very clear already in mid-2019, when she gave her speech on a union that strives for more vis-à-vis the European Parliament, where she set out, say, the logic and the framing of the Green Deal. And what impressed me very much is that obviously she and the new Commission was very much inspired by the Fridays for Futures movement, which was perceived as maybe the strongest civic movement of mostly young people, pan-European, and which was obviously very powerful in inspiring the political agenda of the new Commission. Then we've heard that the Commission came into office almost exactly 1 year ago, and 1 week after that, the Commission came out with its communication on the Green Deal. So it is really, really high up on the agenda. The content is that it is about climate neutrality in 2050, which is a very challenging goal because somehow my feeling is it really needs a reinvention of our societies and of our economies. We are so much reliant on fossil fuels, and to imagine a world without gasoline, without diesel, without coal, without natural gas is something which, even for experts as myself and as my environment agency colleagues, is somehow hard to imagine. So we really have to be very inventive and innovative in bringing this down to earth, and includes all sectors of our economy. So it is the industry, it's the energy sector, obviously, it's the way how we of our transport means of mobility, it's building and renovation, it's agriculture, it's financial, it's the financial sector, it's even on education and on health. And the Green Deal is important for the position of the European Union in the world. So the first, I think aspect to take away is it is a huge, innovative and quite radical program the Commission and the European Union, if member states follow, if Parliament follows, is heading for. The second thing I want to mention is connected to these budgetary issues. Not so much on the amount of the budget, the multi-annual framework and the Next Generation EU. But it is also on the fact that Next Generation EU, the 750 billion euros, will be debt fueled. So it's the first time that the Union itself will make debts. And it is going to pay back over 30 years from 28 onwards to 2058. And that is also a reasoning why the Commission is saying, and why the Union should say, well, if we do this, that we go into debt to solve our current crisis, and pay back such a long time. My sons will be 60 at that time, and they are now students. Then we have a responsibility to do something to make their world a better world, and to make it greener and to make it more sustainable. And also by this, I think there is a strong European integration aspect to that, meaning that if member states together are now responsible for this debt burden, they have to work together even more closely. I came across the following words, that what we now need is not only Keynes, meaning to stimulate our economy, but we also need Schumpeter, who was an Austrian economist. And Schumpeter said that we need innovation, and that we also need to know which branches of industry have to go down. So it means that we have to do this deficit spending in a smart way. And there, you might know that there is a taxonomy, there is a communication and the concept of taxonomy, which means that when you invest into things, how you can be sure that it is green. But we are also working on a brown taxonomy, meaning in which branches should you not invest anymore. Maybe to conclude some aspects, how Austria is dealing with this crisis. We have, since the beginning of this year, a conservative green coalition government, which is quite inspired, or was quite inspired, by coming up with the coalition agreement by the European Green Deal. And so you find in our coalition program, our government program, almost all the aspects which are also covered by the Green Deal. Austria even is going for being climate neutral by the year 2040, so 10 years before the European as a whole, which is a big challenge. And we are going for very similar, say, strategic approaches as does the European Union. So there shall be a green tax reform, there shall be a hydrogen strategy, there shall be a master plan on mobility, there shall be a phase out for coal and heating oil in domestic heating. There shall be a circular economy master plan, there shall be a biodiversity strategy. So we really gather our, say, efforts in our country to make this kind of policy mainstream in the future. I will not go too much into detail on, say, the budgetary issues. Obviously, the state budget for this year has a big problem. So it is more than 10%, there's more than 10% of GDP deficit, which is more than 40 billion euros. Still, the budget for next year shall underpin very strongly the green path, and it tries to combine, say, the stimulus for the economy with all these green aspects. And we have very substantial parts of the state budget that are now dedicated or increased for these purposes that I have already mentioned. The one most important being a program by our state railway, which will invest over the next years until 26 more than 17.5 billion euros in public transport. Last sentence, so we as an environment agency and my experts, we will support the government in implementing this policy, in particular with our knowledge, with our expertise, and we will do the same also at European level in a network of similar agencies. I thank you very much for listening and again for inviting me to this event.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Georg Rebernig, for your very in-depth analysis of the European perspective, but also bringing in the Austrian views and some concrete initiatives as well, which we can perhaps further discuss in the panel. Now we will zoom from Vienna back to here, Helsinki, and I'm delighted to introduce you, Ms. Mari Pansar, who is a director for a carbon neutral circular economy program in the Finnish Innovation Fund, Sitra. Mari, the floor is now yours.
So good morning and a warm thank you. So Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is truly a great pleasure to be here today, gathered around such an important topic, working together for a greener European future. So we all know that even in the era of pandemic, the key factor influencing our future is the urgent need for ecological reconstruction. How do we respond to climate change, decreasing biodiversity or nature loss, and the dwindling availability of resources, and also our waste-related problems? So these really are the defining challenges of our time. Sitra, my organization, the Finnish Innovation Fund, annually organizes World Circular Economy Forums, which gather together over thousands of circular economy decision makers and businesses across the world to discuss how we can make a transition towards a more sustainable economy, a carbon neutral circular economy. And in the WCEF forum online in September this year, the Vice President, Frans Timmermans, said that this is not about the planet, it is about humanity. The planet will survive without us, but we need circular economy to fight climate change and to live in harmony with nature. So the first point in my speech is that we need to understand the big picture and focus on the root causes of the ecological challenges. So we all know that today our world is facing a global sustainability crisis, which actually has three dimensions: the climate crisis, biodiversity loss, and overuse of natural resources. And these all are very closely interconnected. For example, according to United Nations International Resources Panel, extraction and processing of resources causes half of the global air emissions and over 90% of biodiversity and loss and water stress. But on the other hand, OECD has estimated that the global materials use is expected to more than double from today's level by 2060. And this means that by continuing the business as usual path, we would be creating more and more air emissions and causing more and more species loss. And this is really not an option. So we urgently need to make a transition towards carbon neutral circular economy where fossil fuels are replaced by renewable energy sources and we use materials that already exist in the societies instead of extracting more and more natural resources and thus causing more and more air emissions and biodiversity loss. So the circular economy is the key tool for preventing overconsumption of resources, biodiversity loss, and climate change. And when we make a transition towards the circular economy, the focus and attention must be on the root causes. So we really need to rethink how we produce and how we consume materials. About 80% of the environmental footprint of the product life cycle is locked in the design phase. And that is the reason why product design is at the heart of the circular economy. So our products should be designed to be durable, repairable, upgradable, and also recyclable. And luckily, this all is being promoted by the EU Commission through the EU Green Deal. My second point is that the Green Deal needs examples and it also needs forerunners. So Green Deal has been praised to be very systemic, ambitious and also timely. And at least for me, it is very easy to join these praises. So EU has always been the global leader in climate action and also in the circular economy transition. And with the European Green Deal, it will continue to do so. However, the Green Deal has also received some criticism. Some say that it does not have the practical means to deliver the transition. And because Green Deal is about systemic change and requires holistic view, there is a danger that the administration will remain in silos and the big picture is lost due to that. And Finland, and we also at Sitra, we want to drive the ambition level of the Green Deal because we believe that different countries can bring solutions to be part of the Europe-wide actions. And we believe that with inspiring examples, we can ignite discussion and bring together silos and different actors. So Green Deal really needs tested and functional operating models that accelerate change and connect administrational silos. And for those, Finland, Austria, and Sweden certainly have solutions. Here in Finland, perhaps the most visible and inspiring example is our national roadmap towards the circular economy to support our carbon neutrality target by 2035. So actually Finland was the first country in the whole world to prepare a national circular economy roadmap. And now dozens of European countries have done the same and they have prepared their own roadmaps for the circularity. Another great example with European scale-up potential is Sustainable Everyday Life project here in Finland, because it has proven that if information and activities are offered in an exciting and inspiring manner, citizens are ready to change their lifestyles towards more sustainable. And here in Finland, we have created a sustainable lifestyle test that has been done by over 1 million times in Finland. And we believe that this is a very good number because there are only 5.5 million people in our country. And this number actually gives us hope. It tells us that the citizens want to understand what is their lifestyle's impact on global warming and how they can reduce this impact. And now the European Commission has told us that they would like to scale up this concept as a part of Green Deal to all EU member states. And of course, we are very willing to contribute. And these were only two examples what Finland can offer for the Green Deal implementation. I am sure, and certainly Sweden and Austria have their own best practices and concepts that can bring concrete practices and help the real implementation of the European Green Deal. It would be great if we all could share these best examples within the EU and with together. My third point is that the COVID-19 recovery must be aligned with the systemic change needed and with the Green Deal. We see it very important that all COVID-19 recovery investments should be provided with the Green Deal systemic thinking in mind, because the choices that we make now have a direct bearing on how we will be positioned to respond to climate change, nature loss, and also overuse of resources. And Europe really has the potential to emerge from the crisis and to become a fairer, more prosperous, more sustainable, and also more resilient society. So Green Deal focuses on building an economy that reduces economic dependence on materials. And this really calls for systemic change. Decoupling economic well-being from natural resource use is the most convincing growth strategy for the EU and for the whole world today. Using resources more efficiently promises also to reduce EU's dependence on imported materials. It will improve our competitiveness, it will lower our environmental and climate impact, and it will create jobs for us. And the greater self-sufficiency and resilience can also address some of the issues with globalization, which have been exposed by COVID-19, such as fragility of global supply chains. And ladies and gentlemen, my last point is that the success depends also on the global governance. Because today we are more interconnected and more interdependent than ever. And therefore implementation of the Green Deal depends also on the better global governance. Today, it is obvious that a more joined up response to the COVID-19 virus at the global and also EU level could have produced better answers and also saved lives. Similarly, managing climate change and the environment across borders requires us to join our forces, share more sovereignty, and also to cooperate more closely. The experiences from the COVID-19 crisis demonstrate actually that urgent global change is really possible, at least if the crisis is perceived as imminent. And the key will be to direct EU recovery funds in the best way to address the recovery and the actions identified in the Green Deal simultaneously. As former EU Commissioner Janez Potočnik has said, the Green Deal can and should remain the compass guiding Europe's post-COVID recovery. It needs to be implemented with a truly systemic approach, and it should include best practices to deliver the best implementation. So dear friends, we cannot make the next generation to pay the debt that we have created. Our GDP has grown at the expense of depleting natural capital. It passes on the costs of replenishing this capital to future generations. The billions in financial debt being mobilized by countries and institutions to combat COVID-19 are adding to this environmental debt that young people will have to face. And perhaps the most important reason to deliver the European Green Deal is that it has the potential to reduce Europe's intergenerational debt, because we have no other choice than to give the next generation a safer, a more sustainable, and a more resilient world than the one that we are currently living in. Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mari Pansa, for bringing in your analysis, assessments, and also ideas. I think the generational promise is important, as we heard from the opening words as well. The EU has provided a space for breathe for the younger generation, and this is certainly the case with the Green Deal. We will now move to the next keynote address in this keynote session, and this is pre-recorded one, and it comes from Sweden. Nina Ekelund, who is a Secretary General of the Haga Initiative, which is a business network of companies that aims to reduce carbon emissions. Now we hear Nina Ekelund's ideas.
Hello, I'm very glad to join you at Hanaholmen at the 25th anniversary of our membership in the European Union. My name is Nina Ekelund and I'm the Executive Director of the business network, the Haga Initiative. I also want to congratulate, of course, Austria, Finland and Sweden for the membership. And also want to say that I think it's the environment is the winner of our membership. I would like to share some slides with you. So let me start to talk about what Haga Initiative is, and then I will talk about how important the Green Deal is for Europe. And I will do it in a perspective 25 years back today and 25 years ahead of us, what will happen in 2045. So this is the Haga Initiative. It's a business network in Sweden that works to contribute to the 1.5-degree goal. All the companies in the network have decided to have net zero emissions at 2030, and that's 15 years ahead of the Swedish government. The Swedish government is going to have net zero by 2045. And these companies also want to show it's profitable to go ahead. And they also want to show it's possible to do this in different sectors. So I want to look at our membership from an environmental perspective in 3 different perspectives: yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And just looking at 1995, when we started out, I was also a politician at that time, and I was on the list. My big argument why we should join was the environmental question, and the climate, of course, was the main issue. And at that time, we could see a huge optimism for business and some skepticism from policy, depending on what party you belong to. And it also divided the parties, of course. But you could also see that environmentalists and environmental organizations, they were very, very skeptic and negative and thought that the European Union wouldn't help the climate or the environment. But we should also remember at that time, in 1995, just 5 years before, we got the first assessment report from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And they said in their first report, there is a natural greenhouse effect which already keeps the Earth warmer than it would otherwise be. This will result in likely an increase in the global mean temperature of about 1 degree. And that's where we are today. So 25 or 30 years ago, they were right. They were predicting what should happen. Looking today at the membership, we can see that we have a greater EU harmonization. We also can see we have a greater divide between member states, resulting in Brexit, and we can see we have strong countries also want to move the climate agenda quicker than several other countries. And we also have the EU Green Deal. And I want to tell you, 2 years ago, we gathered from the Haga Initiative and from FIIA in Norway and the Finnish business network Climate Leadership Coalition. We gathered around 15,000 companies from the Nordic region, and we had a Nordic call to EU for a more ambitious climate policy. And we wanted to have net zero emissions by 2050. We wanted to have revised the 2030 and 2040 target, and we also wanted binding carbon budget for the emission outside of the EU ETS. And that was, remember that, 2 years ahead of the EU, of the Green Deal. And so we are, of course, very, very happy to see the Green Deal. And we are really curious to see how this will also influence the directives during next year. So Fit for 55 and the higher climate ambition is interesting. And it, of course, in a few weeks, the Council will meet and we will see if it will be 55%, maybe 60%. We want to see the higher ambition here. We also hope that the carbon budget that was discussed in the Parliament, that will be on the agenda as well. The carbon budget is outside of EU ETS. It's important on a national level. We can also see and had suggested several suggestions for a sharper EU ETS to be aligned with a 1.5 degree goal. And that is very important that we sharpen the EU ETS. And I also want to mention it's so important that EU have a sharp target and an ambitious target, because we also have the climate agenda on the global level. And not having the Glasgow meeting, the COP26, that's almost a lost year of negotiations, and we will have it next year, and follow up the Paris Agreement and aligning the world to tour, I hope, 1.5 degree. And that is so important. That's why EU's target is a mover for the whole world to be, and that leadership that EU is taking is so important. Also looking ahead, what can we see in 2045? Will the Green Deal affect, will it help us on the road to be climate neutral or net zero by 2050? Yes, I think so. The Green Deal is looking over, helping us by Fit for 55, looking at all the directives. And it's helping the forerunners, of course, but mostly it also brings along the rest of EU. I'm so sure if we haven't done the work before, EU have already reduced its climate impact with 23%, Sweden 27%. And we can see that GDP is still helping us, so we have decoupled. And if we are going that road, we already have reduced. And if we go into net zero, we need the targets of 2030 and 2040. And to be climate neutral by 2050, it's so important. The Green Deal is not doing it only on the climate side, because it have to be integrated in transport and industry. And that's what's happening and helping all the countries in the European Union. And this new growth strategy based on the Green Deal is crucial, because economy and climate goes together. And we will probably also be affected because we will have a new sustainable development goals. The one we have today in the world, that they go to 2030. And after 2030, there will probably be new sustainable development goals, because we can't see climate isolated. We have to connect it with biodiversity, reducing chemicals, looking how we are using our green, the forest, the agriculture, etc. It all goes together. And we also need to look at the social agenda. And the SDGs is helping us with that, looking at a broader perspective. So with that said, I want to send a clear message to you. The environment is the winner when we joined the European Union, and also the climate, of course. And just want to have a few things in mind when we go nearer the next 25 years. We do have to think on that climate transition is profitable. Climate transition is also for everyone. So we have to bring everyone. And that's also in the social agenda that we're talking in the European Union right now. And we need the climate agenda. We need EU to manage the climate crisis, and EU to be this competitive region that is an inspiration and also helps to move the rest of the world. So thank you for me, and congratulations again, Sweden, Finland, and Austria. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Nina Ekelund, for these greetings from Sweden, also from the business community, a very important intervention to the discussion here today. Now I would like to give the floor to the Marko Sitti, who is a senior fellow in the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. He will provide some comments related to the discussion and the EU's Green Deal. Marko has an extensive background in the EU's energy policy and has now moved to Green Deal and green future discussions. Marko, the floor is now yours, please.
Thank you, Juha, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me. As you can probably imagine, I'm Italian, but being a graduate of the Diplomatische Akademie in Vienna, so having lived in Vienna for 2 years and now in Finland for 6 years, I have some connections and some feelings also for 2 of the countries that are part of this event, at least. But let me just say a few words about the topic of today's event. So I would like to make a few points on where we are now regarding the European Green Deal. Say something also about the role of Finland, Sweden and Austria, and mention some of the challenges and how the world sees the EU in this effort towards a Green Deal. So I will also try to wrap up briefly what previous speakers said. We know that the Green Deal was presented by the new European Commission headed by Ursula von der Leyen in December 2019, and it's a roadmap with many policy areas which strives for climate neutrality, for a green transition. So it's not just about climate, but it's actually trans-sectoral, and it covers many fields of European policy. It was presented in December 2019, and the Commission moved quickly towards the next step. In March 2020, we had the presentation of a draft climate law. I was in Brussels at the time. I was early March, and this was the time when a sudden change occurred. I managed to interview someone in Timmermans' cabinet, and then the European institutions were literally shut down, at least to external visitors. So this was the first major challenge to the Green Deal that came suddenly and unexpectedly, COVID-19. And of course, this begged serious questions. So what happens now? Will the Green Deal retain priority? And we had the precedent of the 2008-2009 crisis, when following the crisis, we had a new turn to fossil fuels. This wasn't really an opportunity for change in a green way, let's say. However, the first response, the first signals that we got from the Commission were rather positive. In May this year, May 2020, the Commission presented its communication, Europe's Moment, and there it was clear that, at least according to the plans, the focus on the digital and green transition would be retained and keep priority. At the same time, during the summer, the EU continued to work on its climate diplomacy. And we saw several important statements in recent months. South Korea, Japan, so major industrial actors of the global north made a carbon neutrality pledge for 2050. So mimicking the European Union in a way, if we think about example and leadership. And then very important, following the EU-China summit last September, China also made a pledge, an initial pledge, to peak carbon emissions by 2030 and to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. So all this was really very relevant to the EU's global role and to the Green Deal, also because if we look ahead to the next steps, the EU has promised to introduce a carbon border adjustment mechanism. So the Commission and European institutions will be working on this in the next months. And the idea is not simply that of taxing others, but that maybe the most desired outcome to begin with is to provide a stimulus for others to imitate the EU and to provide such pledges. And so these pledges from a few countries were a first positive step. At the same time, there is still much to be done, and cooperation with other actors, so the United States, so major polluters, Russia or the global south, it is also very important. It is something that needs to be done together with the rest of the world and not only at the European level. But let me return, I'm moving towards my conclusion. Let me return briefly to intra-EU deliberations, and especially to the climate law and the 2030 targets, which are where the current discussion is at the moment. I think that in these discussions, we see a joint position and also an ambitious position by Finland, Austria, and Sweden. Negotiations for the climate law, which enshrines this carbon neutrality goal for 2050, have been difficult. But the three countries have had a similar position or the same position on a few very important aspects. For example, they all insisted on the carbon neutrality target being binding not simply at the EU level, but also individually on all member states. They also wanted to see the inclusion of a clause in the climate law stating that the EU should aim for negative emissions after 2050. So of course these were ambitious proposals, and so far they have not been included, but we see where these three countries are heading on the topic. They also oppose demands from some other member states, especially from Eastern Europe, which would have watered down commitments, especially through the inclusion of financial requests, or for example, so-called technological neutrality. So the possibility of member states to continue to decide fully their energy mix and hence also keeping some of the more polluting sources in their energy mixes. So this brings me to the last point, and maybe also the main challenge at the moment. There are clearly some member states, not the ones we are celebrating, let's say, here today, that face more difficulties in the transition for economic reasons and due to the structure of their economies and of their energy mix. To address this challenge, the European Commission introduced a so-called just transition and a just transition mechanism. So funds to help the regions that are more dependent on coal, for example. So this was a positive step, but we have to admit at the same time that we are facing a difficult situation, because some of these countries also happen to be, especially, well, Poland and also a neighbor of Austria, Hungary, they also happen to be under a rule of law procedure in the European Union, and they recently vetoed the EU budget. And this poses serious questions when it comes to the next steps, because of course the transition, the Green Deal, the green funds are part of the budget, and now we don't know if we are able to have the 2030 targets in place in good time. So let me conclude by saying that there has been definitely some good progress in 2020, but there are also many challenges that remain, and we are a bit in a limbo at the moment when it comes to green funds and the 2030 targets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco Sitti, for your comments. Very important observations related to the current state of play in terms of the Green Deal. Now we are moving back to our musical performances, and I'm delighted to have Marika Krug and Maja Waits here again. And this time we will hear music from Robert Stolt, Jadla's song, Fen im schönen Polenland. Please. Thank you very much. And now it's time to move to our final session here today, and this is a panel among excellent speakers and panelists. First, I would like to introduce Her Excellency Maximilian Henning, the Ambassador of Austria to Finland. He's been in Finland since 2018 and has an extensive background in EU affairs. Please welcome to the floor. Second, I would like to introduce Her Excellency Nicola Klaas, the Ambassador of Sweden to Finland. And she has recently moved here, and we are very delighted to have you here with us today. She's been a Swedish ambassador, for instance, to the UK, and as well as State Secretary of Foreign and EU Affairs in the Swedish government. Welcome. And then, last but not least, Jan Wahlberg, the Ambassador for Climate Change from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. You have started in your current function in May 2020, and before that you've been also Finland's Consul General in Shanghai. Welcome to the panel. And I would like to perhaps kick off the discussion by going back to the discussion in the keynote session about the green future. And maybe we could have a round of your takeaways from those keynote presentations, as well as Marco Citti's comments. Maybe we start with Maximilian Henning, please.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to look back on 25 years of joint EU membership with a very special focus. And I think the focus on the green economy gives us a good chance to also look into the future and not just in the past of our 25 years together in the EU. And it's also an issue, and I think this came out very well in the panel discussion earlier, where all three of us see eye to eye, where I think we share a very, very high level of ambition. And I dare to say all three of us are leading countries in pushing forward this very, very important topic. So I think it is something, and we heard about this earlier in the panel discussion, that was starting as a discussion topic in 1995, but was certainly not dominant in public debate while Austria and Sweden and Finland joined the EU. But it has certainly moved up to the forefront of public and political debate in our countries today, and it is something that will be dominating, I'm sure, policy making for the years to come. And so I'm very glad we had an opportunity now to discuss this.
Ambassador Klaas, of course, climate has been a big discussion in Sweden for a long time. It's been also one of these big questions, intergenerational questions. We all seen that. How do you see the kind of future of the EU in this respect, whether that kind of fits into the Swedish aspirations to work towards greener future?
I would say that the kind of commitment that we have today from the European Union is extremely helpful. I think a very valid point that was made by the Swedish Minister for European Affairs, Hans Dahlgren, was when you look at actually the support that you have in Sweden for our membership in the European Union, the change that has taken place now with last year when they had a poll, 62%, as he pointed out, were supportive. And as he also said that when we joined, it wasn't that obvious. And as a matter of fact, the week when we had a referendum to join the European Union was probably the 1 week in that year when there was positive support. So we were very lucky that it was that particular week. And these things you might forget. But I think on the kind of, as I said, commitment on the Green Deal and looking at our the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, it's very clear, and the direction is very clear, and I'm quite hopeful, and I think that is very good, and it's good for the coming generation. But then, of course, we have to do our homework, and we have to do it together, and there has to be solidarity. And if we do all that, then I think we're on a very positive path that will propel us into a sort of better and more hopeful future.
Thank you very much. And then Jan Wahlberg, how do you see the situation from the Finnish perspective? We were discussing a couple of days ago with the several policy planners from the Nordic-Baltic region as well as Germany. And maybe your takeaways from those discussions as well would be nice.
Yeah, we had a very good discussion between Germany, Baltics, and Nordics just the other day at Majuha, so I could take in some from there as well. But first of all, I'd like to say that this is a very special day for me because I started as a Finnish diplomat 1st of January 1995, and we were the biggest promotion ever of Finnish diplomats. We were 36, so you have a big chunk of Finnish diplomats who are great friends of Austrian, Swedish, Finnish cooperation. The other personal memories, 2006, we were chairing together the European Union, we had a joint program. So I worked very, very deeply and a lot with Austria 2006. And this year has been a year of Sweden because, as you mentioned, I've started my career as a climate diplomat only this year, and Sweden being the closest neighbor and this advisor. So just to frame the kind of my world goes a lot with Austria and Sweden. But going to the topics, and I could elaborate on that a little bit more. I noticed, like, when the ministers were speaking, that Austria talked about EU budget, and also the Swedish minister, he called the frugal four, and saying that Finland is sometimes pretty close. And when I was reading, I think it was your paper on the other seminar, it said frugal five. So it's becoming a matter of definition how close Finland is within the frugal four, frugal five. And for me, it's of course about budget, but being a climate ambassador, I think it's more for me about climate. And when I look at the climate discussions and then kind of the promise of the budget, 30% going to the climate, we are very, very united with Denmark, Sweden, Netherlands, and then also Austria. There are some elements like it's a friendly discussion, but I think it's important to point out. I remember from 2006, for example, Austria and Finland look quite differently on nuclear energy. So when you come to matters of climate issues, there are issues that having an open dialogue, we can build big alliances. So my second point would be flagging kind of for, I would say, frugal climate five. It's a big demand for that, and then there is already a lot of base for that. That's one observation because the Finnish minister didn't mention the budget, and I think that's kind of has something to do with it. I would pick up perhaps 2 points from the previous speakers. I think Mari made an interesting point, kind of making a call that if each of us thinks what's our contribution to Green Deal, and Mari was stating that for Finland it's a circular economy. And I feel as a Finnish climate diplomat a little bit the same. We are launching a circular economy foreign policy, and then we have worked this a lot with Sitra, and there will be a kind of Mari was mentioning World Circular Economic Forum led by the Dutch perhaps in April, and then a big event in Canada. So I think being a climate diplomat, I think that's kind of, for me, the Finnish intake to the climate dialogue. And I think it's a good advice from Mari that we can also all see how we complement each other in the climate dialogue. But perhaps that's for introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Jan, and highly interesting discussions, and also the term frugal five, frugal four, is of course something we can discuss whether it works in the field of climate, the term frugal, because the financing obviously is a major issue also in the global perspective, but at least ambitious five would be something that could work well in the EU context. Now I think we could go actually back to the ministerial's greetings and maybe have a round of discussion, a round of comments about the kind of the broader EU affairs. Of course, there are plenty of topics. We are not short of topics. Rule of law was mentioned, also the recovery fund, a big discussion for the next European Council meeting taking place next week. There's also security, defense questions mentioned by the Finnish minister, and so forth. But when looking back and then kind of trying to zoom into the future, how do you see that in your countries, the kind of future of the EU, if we go beyond the climate issue, what is the kind of the state of EU support? We hear from Sweden that it's good at the moment, but what are the expectations, and how do you see that the Union would look like in 25 years' time when we're celebrating 50th anniversary? We start again with Max Pitt.
Thank you. It's a very important question. I think the EU, we have talked about how the substantive issues have changed over the years since our joining the EU in 1995, but we must also see that the geographical situation of the European Union is not a static one. When we joined, the EU went from 12 member states to 15. for Austria, at least almost as important as our own accession, was the accession of our neighboring countries in the early 2000s. We heard earlier a piece of music from Robert Strolz, an Austrian piece of music singing about beautiful Poland and Hungary. For us, the larger Central European region is very much the central part of how we feel European. So I think this step was very, very important. But we shouldn't ever forget the next step, the obligation that we have still towards the countries of Southeastern Europe, to the Western Balkans, to allow them to join the European Union. And at least for my country, this is an absolutely crucial and central part of the discussion of Europe's future, and something that has maybe lost focus in the public debate, but for us is still very, very high on the priority list. So in my point of view, that's a key issue. Just to take up the issue also of frugality and sometimes being a little bit more critical, I think it helps to underscore your enthusiasm if you take a step back sometimes and be openly critical, and to pick out those elements which you feel should be adjusted. I think it's a sign of enthusiasm if you take the time to be critical once in a while, and I think this is what our leadership in all three countries has been doing in the process of the European Union budget. It's not that we have lost interest in the European project, or that we are less interested in it because we are prepared to scrutinize the budget a little bit more. I think it's rather the opposite. It's a sign of interest if one is more critical once in a while in shaping European policies.
Thank you very much. What about Sweden? It's really interesting, the rising support.
Trying to understand the future, we have to understand our past. And I think when we look back at the 25 years, there's so much that has happened. And I just look back at 1991 when we handed in our membership application. It was just shortly before the failed August coup in the Soviet Union. And so it was an interesting start for myself as the Swedish Minister of Foreign Affairs. And then, of course, in '93, with the single market, at that time, some 300 million. Today, it's more than 500 million. And the kind of job creation that we've seen in the last 25 years. So it is quite impressive with the kind of economic growth that we've seen. I think the enlargement has been extremely important and continues to be, where the three of us are very much aligned on that topic. We were perhaps taken a bit by surprise when the ESDP was launched, but we quickly adjusted. We're even part of the first J42 operation, as it was referred to in those days. It was a demining operation in Croatia. Maybe more symbolic than actually, how to say, well, it was an interesting project, but from then, of course, we have advanced quite significantly. But there's so many other issues as well. And one particular one I'd like to point at is, of course, the EU Baltic Sea strategy, where that was the first regional macro strategy. And now we have more such strategies, like in the Alpine region as an example. So we're learning from each other. So there's so much to learn from. But what I would say, as it was brought up, that sometimes we also need to be a bit critical. There is a point where I would be a bit critical. I think sometimes that the European Union is not very good at marketing itself. The language and the way things are presented are quite difficult to actually to use if you want to reach out to a broader audience, and not least the younger generation. And that's something that we often pointed out. Many of the documents, they're fine when you're a traditional bureaucrat, but then you hand them over to younger generation, trying to understand what's going on. I think we could get better at that, I would say. And obviously in the future, I think the fact that somehow we know that if we want to solve problems in the European continent, we have to work together. I think I worked for quite a few years on migration, even if that is a very, very difficult topic and it's difficult for the European Union members to actually agree on. But I've rarely felt as European as working on that particular issue, because it is so clear that we have to do things together. And as I said, many more examples. But, I could go on because I get so engaged, because I just think it's fascinating.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. What about Jan? This is
excellent points already. I'll take a different one. Just, and a little, quite personal actually, because the Austrian minister, I think, interestingly mentioned the conference on the future of Europe.
Yes.
And how I started my European affairs career in the foreign ministry was being a specialist in Latin America. I knew nothing about Europe. And then there is a convention for the Europe led by Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, and I had to be the desk officer for that. And I still remember I used to know the articles of the new constitutional treaty. My colleagues were talking, of course, about the EU treaty articles, so it was a difficult moment for me. But perhaps that point of Europe was the high point where we believed that we need a constitution, we need a common narrative. And I remember it was also like we are now 1 week away from the European Council, December Council. It was the summer council, but anyway, we are drafting a draft, Untitled kind of a note for the European leaders on the constitution. And then Jean-Claude Piris, who was at that time the legal advisor, he looks at his mobile and says that the Dutch, they voted against the constitution. Let's go home, guys. And that paper was lost for 2-3 years. That narrative, we had to rediscover it, but I kind of lived, in a way I felt like the high moment of European ambitions. But my point here would be that we do need the narrative, and I believe a lot in the Green Deal. Marco made a good point that there was a discussion when we got the COVID crisis, that some member states even said, can we afford Green Deal with having COVID? But I think it reinforces the message that we really do need a Green Deal. And then it's, I think for all of us, it's a dual agenda. It's both green and it's digital. So I think we have Nokia, we have Ericsson here, and we are all very digital. But I think that's kind of a narrative that you mentioned, that it's important to be close to the young people and to the citizens. So I think Green Deal is a very promising European narrative in the sense that it's down to earth. It tackles the crucial matters. It's more concrete than trying to make a constitutional treaty for Europe. So I believe in the Green Deal project.
Can I just add a comment on the Lisbon Treaty, because we had a very awkward position with our presidency coming up then in 2009, that we didn't actually know if the Lisbon Treaty was going to be entering into force before our presidency or after our presidency. And I remember saying to colleagues, I think actually that we should also be prepared that it could enter into force during our presidency. And I think that was not something that colleagues were very happy with, because it felt a bit easier to deal with before or after, but actually it did happen exactly that way. We had it during our presidency.
Yes.
But I should point out that we prepared as though it would be entering into force, so that was the way to do it. But these things, when we sort of recollect and you look back and you remember very many interesting episodes.
Yes. I think it's a very interesting observation if we think about this Lisbon Treaty or the Constitutional Treaty, and we often call in the research community the Constitutional Decade, which started Maastricht Treaty, Amsterdam, so forth, and then the failed Constitutional Treaty. But this, what Jan said, in the way that maybe the new narrative, the new identity of the Union is somehow connected to the very pragmatic agenda, achieving goals in terms of Green Deal, perhaps also economy, digital economy. Maybe that's a change, that it's not so much about structures or institutions, constitution, which was perhaps the narrative of the past integration generations. It would be interesting to see how this will evolve in due course with the new generations. And now I have to thank you all for your excellent remarks and your participation, and of course support for this event as well. Now we still have one element in this seminar, and that's the final presentation by Marika Krug and also Maja Waits. And now we hear Tore Rangström's Den enda stunden as a final performance for this event. And with these words, I want to thank also all the performers, the speakers, and all the organizers who've been behind this wonderful event. Thank you very much.